She stood tall beneath the towering arches of the ceremonial hall, her silver-blue gown glimmering under the pale crystal lights. Her people had waited for this moment for weeks, a union of diplomacy between stars, a weaving of respect through tradition. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on her. Every breath was held, waiting. She expected the human to approach her with the rigid formality of her kind, arms crossed, palms turned outward, heads bowed in distance. That was how things were meant to be. That was the safe, proper way. But when the human finally stepped into her presence, everything unraveled. Instead of bowing, he closed the distance. Instead of offering silence, he let out a soft breath that trembled with something dangerously close to longing. And then, before she could command him to stop, his arms wrapped around her slender frame, pulling her against the warmth of his body. A gasp escaped her lips, not only because of the scandalous breach of custom, but because of the strange, unexplainable heat that bloomed in her chest the moment his touch pressed through the layers of her gown. Her body froze, her mind splintered between outrage and something she couldn't name. Her heart raced, thundering against his chest, and though she should have shoved him away, she found herself locked in his arms, stunned and breathless. Her people whispered around them in shock, yet all she could hear was the pounding of blood in her ears. Was this what humans called a greeting? Or was this something more, something dangerous, something forbidden, something she might never forget? And in that moment, when her life should have been clear and ceremonial, the spark of chaos entered her world, wrapped in the shape of a human embrace. The hall erupted into murmurs. Some of her people gasped aloud, others covered their mouths, their luminous eyes wide with disbelief. Tradition was sacred to them, older than stars, older than empires. No one touched, not in ceremony, not in greeting, not unless bonds had already been spoken and vows sealed. And yet here she was, the daughter of her people's house, pressed against the chest of an outsider. Her first instinct was to recoil, to push him back and remind him of the boundaries he had so recklessly crossed. But when she tilted her chin to glare up at him, her voice caught in her throat. His eyes, strange, earthy, impossibly warm, were locked on hers with an intensity she had never known. Not arrogance. Not mockery. Something far more dangerous. Something that left her trembling. Slowly, he released her, as though reluctant to let go. His voice came low, steady, carrying none of the stiffness she had expected. "Where I come from," he said softly, "this is how we greet those we wish to honor. Not with distance. Not with silence. But with closeness." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She had spent her life memorizing ceremony, learning the gestures that defined respect, yet never had anyone told her what it meant to feel respect this way, in heat, in breath, in the nearness of another body. A counselor from her court stepped forward, his face pale with outrage. "Ambassador," he barked. "This is an insult. You have broken the sanctity of our tradition." But she raised her hand, silencing him. Even she was startled at the strength in her voice. "Enough." The word rang through the hall, and the murmurs stilled. She was supposed to rebuke the human, demand an apology. That was what the order of things required. But as she stood there, her heart still unsteady, she found herself hesitating. She looked at the human once more. His lips curved faintly, not in mockery, but in something she struggled to name. Tenderness, perhaps. Or hope. The formal procession continued, though it moved like a ghost to her senses. The rest of the delegation bowed, spoke, performed the rites. She played her part with flawless grace, but her thoughts remained fixed on the moment when arms had closed around her. That warmth had not left her skin. It lingered, seeping beneath her composure, burning at the edges of her restraint. When the hall finally emptied and the ceremony drew to a close, she returned to her private chambers, dismissing her attendants with a wave. Alone, she paced the length of her chamber, the train of her gown sweeping across the marble floor. She touched her chest as though trying to still the echo of her heartbeat, but the memory only sharpened. What was it about that embrace? Why had it unsettled her so deeply? Her people believed closeness to be dangerous, that it dissolved the barriers of dignity, that it unraveled discipline. Yet when his arms had closed around her, she had not felt stripped of dignity. She had felt seen. Acknowledged, not as an emissary or symbol, but as a woman. She turned toward the mirror, staring at her reflection. The silver of her hair shimmered faintly, her markings glowing in patterns of agitation. She pressed her hands to her cheeks, remembering the heat of his chest, the way his breath had stirred the strands of her hair. No. She must not think of it. She must not allow one reckless moment to undo years of training. Tomorrow, she would face him again in council, and she would re-establish the distance her people demanded. She would remind him of the boundaries that must never be crossed. But even as she told herself these things, she felt the ghost of his touch haunting her. The warmth, the steady beat of his heart, the strength in his arms. For the first time in her life, she struggled to fall asleep not because of fear, not because of duty, but because of the memory of a single forbidden embrace that refused to fade. And though she buried her face in her silken sheets, trying to force the thoughts away, one truth carved itself into her soul. The human's hug had not been a mistake. It had been a beginning. The next morning, the council chamber was filled with polished voices, echoing agreements, and the slow unfolding of diplomacy. She sat upon the raised dais, her expression as calm and flawless as her people expected. Her attendants stood behind her, their eyes sharp, their posture rigid, as though they could will away the memory of yesterday's scandal. But no matter how many treaties were recited, no matter how carefully the words were measured, she could not quiet her thoughts. Across the chamber, the human sat at his delegation's table, listening intently, his posture unassuming yet steady. He did not look ashamed. He did not look regretful. And when his gaze finally lifted and caught hers, his eyes carried a flicker that stole the breath from her lungs. He remembered. He knew what he had done. She tore her gaze away before anyone noticed, but her pulse betrayed her, quickening in her throat. She could not allow herself to be unraveled again, not here, not in the heart of her people's diplomacy. When the council recessed for midday, she sought solitude, slipping into the shaded gardens carved into the heart of the palace. Here, crystalline fountains whispered, and flowers from 100 worlds released their mingled scents. It was a sanctuary meant to calm the mind. Yet when she heard footsteps behind her, her heart jolted. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered sharply, turning to face him. The human stood at the archway, the sunlight pouring across his broad shoulders, softening the harsh lines of his uniform. "And yet," he said quietly, "I am." Her breath caught. He took a step forward, not reckless this time, but deliberate, as though offering her the chance to send him away. She did not move. "You broke every law of courtesy yesterday," she said, her voice low, her tone meant to sting. "Do you have any idea what risk you placed upon yourself?" "Upon me? I know exactly what I did," he replied, his voice steady. "And I'd do it again." Her lips parted in disbelief. "Why? To humiliate me? To show my people that you treat tradition as nothing?" He shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because where I come from, a hug is not humiliation. It is not disrespect. It is the opposite. It is trust. It is saying, I will hold you, and I will not harm you. You are safe with me." The words struck her harder than she wanted to admit. Safe. The word curled through her chest like a forbidden sweetness. Safe with him? It made no sense. He was foreign, reckless, impossible. And yet, as she looked at him, she remembered the warmth of his arms, the steadiness of his heartbeat, and how, for one dangerous moment, she had believed it. "You cannot speak such things to me," she said, forcing steel into her voice. "You cannot make me think of such closeness." His lips curved faintly, not in triumph, but in something gentler. "And yet you are thinking of it." She turned away sharply, her cheeks heating. She should have ordered him gone. She should have called her guards. Instead, she stood in silence, staring at the fountain as water spilled in glimmering arcs. When she finally found her voice, it was soft, reluctant. "Your people do this often? Hug one another without ceremony?" "Not without meaning," he said. "But yes. Between friends. Family. Lovers." The last word lingered in the air like a forbidden flame. Her heart thudded painfully, and she cursed it under her breath. Before she could reply, the sound of footsteps and hushed whispers reached them. She froze. 2 of her attendants entered the far end of the garden, searching. She stepped away from him instinctively, putting distance between them before they could see. The human understood without being told. With a respectful nod, he slipped back into the shadows, vanishing through a side passage. Her attendants arrived moments later, bowing stiffly. "Lady, the council seeks you," one said, his tone clipped. But the look in his eyes was sharper. Suspicious. Rumors. They had already begun. That evening, the palace hummed with tension. She heard whispers in the corridors, fragments of words spoken when they thought she could not hear, unrefined, reckless, dangerous. The human's embrace had not been forgotten, and though none dared accuse her directly, she knew the thought hovered unspoken. Had she allowed it? Had she wanted it? She forced herself into composure, gliding through the halls as though the whispers meant nothing. But when she reached her chambers, she found her steps slowing, her chest tightening. She wanted to see him again. To demand he stop. To demand he explain more. Or perhaps, to feel the warmth of that embrace once more. The conflict tore at her until night fell. The moment came unexpectedly. A formal banquet was underway in the grand dining hall, where dignitaries feasted beneath shimmering crystal chandeliers. She played her part with perfection, rising to toast, offering polite words. But just as the hall rang with applause, a sudden tremor shook the chamber. A structural fault in the ancient palace walls gave way with a thunderous crack. Dust rained down as part of the vaulted ceiling threatened to collapse. Panic swept the hall. Attendants screamed, guards rushed forward, but before she could move, a strong arm encircled her waist, pulling her from beneath the falling debris. She gasped, pressed against the human once more, his body shielding hers as fragments crashed around them. The roar of stone drowned out all sound, and yet, within the cage of his arms, she felt safe. Safe, again. The word struck her, dizzying, intoxicating. When the danger passed and the hall settled into frantic commotion, she realized her hands were clutched tightly against his chest, as though refusing to let go. She tore herself away, her breath shaking, her heart betraying her. "You," her voice broke. She swallowed, tried again. "You should not hold me like that." His eyes were steady, unflinching. "Would you rather I let you be crushed?" Her lips trembled. She wanted to rebuke him, but the words died in her throat. What she had felt in those few seconds of shelter was not fear, not shame. It was something far more dangerous. Longing. She stepped back, her composure cracking, her chest rising too quickly with each breath. She whispered the only words she could manage. "This cannot happen again." And yet, as she turned and fled the hall, her body still burned with the memory of his arms. And deep inside, a voice she could not silence whispered, "But what if I want it to happen again?" This section is about breaking traditions. Their bond deepens, she begins to seek him out, conflict between duty and desire grows, they argue, and it culminates in her letting him touch her face for the first time, admitting the hug haunts her. Days passed, but the whispers did not fade. If anything, they grew louder, curling through the palace like smoke. Every time she entered the council chamber, she could feel her people's eyes on her, not openly accusing, but watchful, probing, as if waiting for a misstep. They were suspicious of the human, yes, but what unsettled her most was the silent question buried in their stares. And what of her? She played her part as flawlessly as ever, her words measured, her movements precise. Yet beneath the surface, she was unraveling. Each night she lay awake, her mind replaying the moments she had sworn to forget, the first embrace, reckless and shocking, the second, fierce and protective. She had told herself she wanted no more of it, but her body betrayed her. In the privacy of her chamber, her hands would sometimes curl against her chest, remembering the solidity of his arms. Finally, her resolve cracked. One evening, when the palace quieted and the last of the council's business concluded, she slipped through a side corridor, her hood drawn low. She told herself it was to confront him, to demand distance, to put an end to the madness before it cost them both. But when she reached the secluded garden where he often lingered, she froze at the sight of him waiting as if he had known she would come. "You should not be here," she whispered, though the words lacked conviction. He looked up from the carved bench where he sat, the moonlight spilling across his features, softening them into something dangerously human. "And yet here you are," he replied. Her chest tightened. "I came to tell you this must end. Whatever game you think you're playing with me, It cannot continue. He rose, stepping closer, and she found herself rooted in place. A game? Is that what you think this is? What else could it be? She shot back, her voice sharp to mask the tremor beneath. You break our customs, you touch me in ways that could ruin my standing, perhaps even tear apart what fragile peace we are building. And yet, he cut in, his voice steady but low, you keep coming back. The words struck deep. She flinched as though he had uncovered something she desperately wanted hidden. That is not true. He tilted his head, his eyes searching hers. Then tell me you don't think of it. Tell me you haven't wondered what it meant. Tell me you haven't remembered what it felt like every night since. Her breath hitched. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. She wanted to deny it, to throw the lie in his face and retreat into the safety of pride. But her lips betrayed her, trembling, refusing to form the falsehood. Finally, she tore her gaze away, whispering hoarsely, "You don't understand what you ask of me. My people, they would never forgive it. They would never forgive me. And what about you?" His voice was softer now, almost a plea. "Would you forgive yourself if you kept denying what you feel?" Her chest heaved with the weight of his words. What she felt. She had spent her whole life burying such impulses under duty and tradition. But he had ripped open that cage with a single embrace, and now the truth clawed at her, begging to be acknowledged. She turned back to him, anger and longing tangled in her eyes. "You presume too much. You think because you touched me, you know me? You think because your customs allow such closeness, I must accept them." "No," he said simply. "I think because I touched you, I know us." The boldness of it shocked her into silence. She searched his face, expecting arrogance, but finding instead an almost unbearable sincerity. No diplomacy. No strategy. Just a man standing before her, unafraid to bear his truth. She felt her strength faltering. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you have any idea what would happen if anyone saw us like this?" "Yes." He stepped closer, closing the space between them until she could feel the faint warmth of his presence. "But do you have any idea what will happen to you if you keep pretending you don't want it?" Her breath came fast, her body betraying her composure. She should have pushed him back, reminded him of the gulf between their worlds. Instead, she stood frozen, her heart pounding so violently she was certain he could hear it. Then his hand lifted, slowly, reverently, as though he were asking permission with every inch. She didn't move, didn't stop him. When his fingers brushed against her cheek, the world seemed to fall silent. The touch was featherlight, yet it ignited her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. She gasped softly, her eyes wide. No one had ever touched her face like this. Not attendants, not family, not even suitors chosen for her by council decree. This was different. This was personal. This was intimacy stripped of ritual, raw and forbidden. "You should not," she whispered, though her voice lacked strength. "And yet you're not stopping me," he murmured back. Her eyes fluttered closed against the dangerous truth. Her heart betrayed her with every beat. The memory of his arms, the warmth of his chest, the protection he had offered, it all came rushing back. And in that moment, she could no longer pretend. When she opened her eyes again, they were glassy with a mixture of fear and longing. Her lips trembled as she breathed the confession she had sworn she'd never allow. "I think of it every night. The way you held me. The way it felt." The admission left her shaken, as though speaking it had torn open something sacred and irreversible. For a moment, silence hung between them, and she feared she had doomed herself. But then his hand lingered against her cheek, his thumb brushing gently over her skin, and his voice came low, steady, filled with something deeper than she dared name. "Then stop running from it." Her body swayed, caught between the abyss of her people's wrath and the intoxicating pull of something new, something human. And though she pulled back before she could surrender completely, her heart was no longer hers to guard. She turned away, her voice trembling. "If I let this continue, there will be no turning back." "Then don't turn back," he said softly. Her hands clenched at her sides as she walked away into the shadows of the palace, but the truth burned in her chest. He was right. She was no longer capable of forgetting. That night, when she lay awake staring at the ceiling of her chamber, Her heart pounded with a truth too dangerous to admit aloud. She wanted him. She wanted his touch, his embrace, the reckless warmth of his human closeness. And she knew, deep down, that she would seek it again no matter the cost. This section will be the climax and resolution. She surrenders to love, they risk everything, are caught, and she publicly chooses him, shocking her people but opening the path for unity. The nights stretched longer, her sleepless thoughts filled with fire she could not quench. She had spent her whole life wrapped in discipline, in distance, in the rigid expectations of her people, but one human had undone it all with a single embrace. And now, she could no longer run. She found herself seeking him out again, first in shadows, then in chambers where the walls felt too close to hear their voices. Each time they met, she told herself it would be the last. Each time, she promised she would restore the barrier. Yet each time, she left with her heart burning hotter, the threads of tradition fraying beyond repair. One night, when the moons cast silver light over the garden pools, she stood before him, trembling. "Do you understand what it means if I let this continue?" she whispered. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "Yes. It means you choose what you want, instead of what they demand." Her chest rose sharply, as though the words had pierced through years of armor. "They will destroy me for it." "Then let them," he said softly, brushing a strand of her silver hair from her face. "Because love is worth it. You're worth it." The words shook her to the core. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not as a symbol, not as a duty, but as a woman. A woman who could be desired, cherished, chosen. Her lips parted, her heart racing. And then, without command, without hesitation, she leaned forward. For the first time, it was she who closed the distance, her hands curling against his chest as her lips met his. The kiss was fire and unraveling. It shattered every law she had obeyed, every boundary she had held. She felt his arms circle her once more, not in greeting, not in rescue, but in pure, desperate need. And this time, she did not resist. She melted into him, her body surrendering to the truth she had buried too long. When they broke apart, breathless, her forehead rested against his. "I cannot undo this," she whispered. "Good," he murmured. "Because I don't want you to." But love was never safe. It happened 2 nights later. They thought they were alone, hidden within the quiet sanctuary of her chamber. They thought the palace walls were silent. But shadows carry eyes, and envy walks on quiet feet. A rival noble, one who had long opposed her family's seat of power, had followed her steps and seen what should have been unseeable. He emerged from the shadows with a cruel smile, his voice sharp as a blade. "So it is true. The daughter of our house, wrapped in the arms of an outsider. How quickly dignity falls when pressed against flesh." Her blood turned cold. She stepped back, her hand trembling though she fought to still it. "You will say nothing." The noble's laughter was low and poisonous. "On the contrary, I will say everything. The council will hear of this betrayal by dawn. And when they do, your name will be ash, and his body will be offered as apology." The human moved instantly, placing himself between her and the threat, his jaw tight. "You will not touch her." The noble sneered. Bold words for a man who knows nothing of consequence. "She belongs to her people, not to you." And in that moment, she felt the full weight of her choice. She could remain silent, let the noble drag her love into ruin, or she could step forward into the storm and claim what her heart had already chosen. Her chest heaved. Her people's traditions screamed in her mind, warning her of disgrace, of exile, of betrayal. But when she looked at the human, his body tense, his eyes fierce, willing to risk everything to protect her, she knew the truth. She would rather be ruined with him than live safe without him. She stepped forward, her voice ringing with a clarity she had never dared before. "Enough. If the council must hear of this, let them hear it from me. I am not ashamed. I will not hide. I have chosen him." The noble's eyes widened, shock flickering before his rage. "You would throw away centuries of tradition for a human?" Her hand slid into the human's, their fingers lacing tight, unbreakable. Her voice grew stronger, steady as stone. "I would throw away centuries of fear for love." By morning, the council chamber was filled, every noble, every elder summoned to hear the scandal. Murmurs echoed like storms as she stood at the dais, the human beside her. The rival noble shouted accusations, his voice dripping venom, demanding her removal, demanding the human's punishment. But she did not cower. She lifted her chin, her silver hair gleaming in the light, her hand still clasped in the human's. And when silence finally fell, she spoke. Yes. It is true. He broke our customs, and I did not stop him. He embraced me, and I let him. Not once. Not twice. But every time, I returned to him, because what I found in his arms was not weakness, but strength. Not shame, but truth. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The noble sputtered, enraged. But she pressed on, her voice carrying like a blade of light. Our traditions tell us that closeness is dangerous, that it destroys discipline. But I have learned the opposite. His closeness does not weaken me, it makes me stronger. His touch does not defile me, it makes me whole. I will not apologize for this. I will not renounce it. The chamber erupted into chaos, some shouting in outrage, others silenced into awe. And then she did the unthinkable. Before them all, before centuries of ritual, she turned to the human and embraced him, her arms winding around him with fierce certainty. He held her back without hesitation, and the sight silenced the hall. The image burned into the eyes of every witness, their noble daughter, not bowing, not distant, but clinging to a human with unshakable love. For a moment, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. The noble spat curses, swearing ruin. But the silence of others told her everything. They had seen the strength in her defiance, the truth in her declaration. And in that silence, she knew history had changed. That night, when the halls were quiet again and the torches burned low, she lay against the human's chest, his arms curled around her. For the first time, she felt no fear of being caught. For the first time, she felt free. You risked everything, he whispered into her hair. So did you, she answered softly. She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. But tell me, was it worth it? His smile was quiet, certain, filled with the warmth that had unraveled her life. Every moment. She pressed her lips to his once more, sealing her choice, her rebellion, her love. And as the stars wheeled silently above their world, she knew the truth would never change. The human's hug had not only altered her heart. It had altered destiny.